excited to talk to you today about this brand new school year that we just got underway and some new strategies to help kids plan, persist, and achieve academic success. As Patty mentioned, my name is Ann Dolin, and for the last 25 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants have been helping kids to do better in school and then ultimately get into the college of their choice. So at this time of year, with so much newness around us, we all have such good intentions, not just us as parents, but kids too. Sometimes at the beginning of the school year, kids will say things like, oh, this year is going to be different. I'm going to wake up and be ready on time for school. Or, don't worry, Mom, I'm going to turn all my assignments in. You're not going to have to nag me this year. Now, on the other hand, parents also want a fresh start in the new school year. And parents think of things like, I want to have a better relationship with my child. I'm going to be calmer. I'm not going to yell or nag. I want to communicate better with my child. Or I'll criticize less and focus more on the positive. So we all go into this new school year with great intentions. But here's the problem. Although kids and parents alike have really great intentions, sometimes putting these intentions into action is difficult. And part of the reason kids have difficulty, even though they have grand ambitions of getting good grades or keeping on top of all the work, sometimes these things called weak executive function skills get in the way. And executive function skills are it's like a fancy term for a study habit. It has to do with things like being organized and planning ahead and starting things on time and keeping track of all your assignments, studying effectively. So tonight, we're going to discuss how you can help your kids in those areas. We'll talk about the power of routines, helping kids to actually execute on their tasks and get things done. We'll discuss resources that you have for yourself as a parent, because you don't have to do all of this alone. And then lastly, most importantly, are really good communication skills to keep that relationship solid between you and your child. So let's start out with the first thing, ready-made routines. What is a routine? Well, a routine just kind of makes the day flow easier. Everybody kind of knows what to do. I mean, how many of you have wanted a smoother day, less chaos with your kids? We all want that. We all want a little bit more predictability, know what's going to happen. But sometimes with kids, they push back on us and they may argue or give us a hard time about starting their homework. Sometimes it's an uphill battle. But if you have a routine, that means that a general time frame for doing things throughout the day, it makes life a little bit easier. It kind of puts life on autopilot. Everybody knows what to expect. So when I think of a routine for school, I think of when should kids start homework? And can we have a routine around that? So when I think about when, I think there's lots of times for kids to do their homework. They can come home right after school, or when you pick them up from aftercare, or you get home from work and they're at home. So they can start right after school. They could start right after a 30-minute break, maybe before dinner, after dinner. I wouldn't recommend right before bed. And some kids are such procrastinators that they start before school the next morning, even on the bus ride to school or in their flex period right before that class starts. But in general, most students need a little bit of downtime when they get home from school. So about a 30-minute break is good, generally for younger kids. Older kids want to start homework a little bit later. So you can have the routine in your house that we start homework before dinner. That doesn't mean it all has to get completed, but it does mean that the laptop comes out or the books come out and there's a plan. You know, everybody has their materials for getting started. Or maybe it's right after dinner. But by having a routine, like in our house, this is when homework starts, there's a lot less pushback and kids are more willing and likely to fall into line because there's this predictability factor. And I like routines. They lend themselves well to predictability because kids like to know what to expect. They function better when they have routines in their lives. And sometimes students do not do well with change. And so that predictability is really helpful. You can have a routine that's daily, like in our family, everybody starts homework before dinner or right after dinner or right after sports practice, as an example. But you can also have a weekly routine. I personally think and have found a lot of benefits in working with lots of kids over the years to use Sundays as like a launching point for the rest of the week. So maybe you have a family dinner on Sunday night, or you eat together in some capacity. Maybe piggyback this meeting, the Sunday session, on the back of dinner, because you always do that. It's easier to remember. So you might say to all your kids, hey, let's look at the week ahead. And everybody's participating in this meeting, just not one of your kids, but everybody. Everybody can do this. And during this time, you're going to say what you have coming up this week. Let's take a look at, for younger kids, your after school curricular activities. And I found it to be super helpful for kids to know what they have going on after school. So this is a weekly schedule. It's kind of like a way for you to sit down with your child on Sunday night and say, let's list out what's going on this week. Are there any changes in the schedule? Kids do well with visuals. They do better with visuals than with the verbal. So if we always tell them, don't forget, you have soccer today, it's often in one ear and out the other. But if it's in written form in a public place like the refrigerator, kids understand it a lot better. So take a few minutes just to jot these down with your child, or they can write them down and have a discussion on Sunday night. You're basically previewing together. This is great for younger kids that may not have homework, but for older students that do have homework, let me get to those kids in a second. By the way, if you want this weekly schedule template, you can download it. I have it on my website, and it's ectutoring.com/BTS, which stands for Back to School -2023. And it will come straight to your inbox. Now, most kids do well with looking at the week ahead. Sometimes, though, kids with a lot of homework, especially older students, need to take that time to see, do I have any big tests, projects, quizzes? What do I have coming up this week that I can prepare for tonight so that I go to school on Monday morning feeling really on top of my work? And so that is a great time for kids to open their laptop, go to their portal, and see what they have going on in their classes. Is there anything that they can start on tonight? I did this with my kids when they were growing up on Sundays. And I remember specifically my younger son, who at the time, I think he was about a sophomore in high school. And he's like, Mom, this is so dumb. Why do I have to do this anymore? Like, we've been doing this forever, and I already know that I've got everything under control. And I said, I get it. Why don't you just take a look at your portal and just be sure? He's like, whatever. Okay. So he logged in, and within like 10 seconds, he's like, oh my gosh, mom, can you go onto Amazon and order me this book right away? I need to bring it to school on Tuesday. I completely forgot about it. And so by previewing the week, it's an opportunity to see what do I have going on. Now, we can also have routines around physical things to be more organized. Enter the launching pad. This is a routine about getting organized and ready for school. So the night before, the idea is that kids take their binders, their folders, everything that goes into their backpack, anything else they need for school, like their sports equipment, and they put it in their launching pad. Their launching pad is a bin, it's a box, it's just some kind of container that goes by the door from which the student exits. And this way, they're getting ready the night before, so they launch into a new day in the morning without so much rushing around. In some families, that may not be practical to have a bin. Maybe it's just that they have a little space on the island in the kitchen. This is their space. This is where their stuff goes at night when they're done with their homework. Same idea. You're just launching into a new day in an organized fashion. You know where everything is. We can have the same routine around our digital things. We kind of want to tuck them in at night. So we take all our digital devices, we put them onto a charger, and these would include things like laptop, earbuds, case, all this stuff. And we basically tuck them in and say goodnight. And it's helpful in a couple of ways. One is that it keeps devices out of kids' rooms at night. Two, it allows them to go to school with everything charged. It is so common for kids to get to school, their laptop isn't charged. If they need their phone, that's not charged. Their earbuds aren't charged. And this routine helps them really be organized with their digital supplies. When we work with kids, we teach them strategies like this so that they're more prepared for school. We also talk to them about your supplies have best friends too. And I love this concept of best friends. It means that things go together like best friends. Like maybe your laptop always goes with your assignment notebook. These are two things you always want to bring to class. Or perhaps if you have your laptop, you always have your charger. Or maybe you have your phone and your charger. You have your earbuds and your case. You have your backpack and your lunch. These things are best friends. So when kids leave for school, for example, their backpack and their lunch, they're best friends. They always go together. So we talked a little bit about that daily routine of having predictability, of having things kind of on autopilot. We talked about using Sundays to launch into a new week. We talked about a launching pad and also tucking in our digital devices. But let's shift gears and talk about getting things done, because this can really be the hardest part for kids, is actually the execution of their work. But the good news is there's simple strategies that can help. And if your child is really struggling with their schoolwork, there are ways to outsource this so that you can get help at school or from a professional in the field. So let's start out with the homework hotspot. The homework hotspot is basically the place that your child will do their work. And it can also be multiple places. I have to say though, when I think of kids going and doing their homework, some of the kids that we work with, I think they're kind of like Super Bowl kids. You watch the Super Bowl in January or early February, and the game itself is only an hour, but the game is on TV for about 4 hours. Sometimes kids are like that. They're Super Bowl kids. They're up in their room for 4 hours, but maybe they only really get done an hour's worth of homework. And you might be wondering as a parent, okay, what are they doing this entire time? Are they really doing their work? It could be that maybe the place in which they're doing their work is kind of distracting. So here are a couple of recommendations. For younger kids, like elementary school kids, they may not be as efficient in their bedrooms. They may do better at a place like perhaps the dining room table that's within earshot of you. So you can keep an eye out every now and then to make sure they're on track. Older kids, however, often do want to do homework in their bedroom. And if you try to make the suggestion that they do homework, say, in the dining room, you might be met with resistance. But what I will say is that if they're doing homework on their bed, it isn't ideal. But if you can get a table or a desk into their bedroom that they're able to sit down and do work, that can be their homework hotspot. And that will really help them to be a little bit more focused. All right, so we talked about the homework hotspot, but we also want to make sure that it's not in the way of digital distractions. So our hotspot shouldn't be, for example, in a room where the TV is going. That would be inherently distracting. If your child says, I have to have my phone, which isn't usually the case, but if they're insistent and it's hard to break that habit, just say, oh, could you put it on airplane mode, or perhaps turn it over so that you're not seeing all those text messages pour in. Anytime we can help kids with digital distractions, it's beneficial. As parents, our game plan, or as guardians, is to make sure of a couple of things. Number one, that we have a basic routine in our families. The routine, by the way, doesn't have to be a schedule. So sometimes if we say, oh, I'm always going to tell my child to do homework at 4 o'clock every day, it's probably not going to work out because schedules are different every day and it's hard to commit to something. But if you have the routine, like around dinner is where we get started, that seems to be a little bit better. So we want to make sure kids have a basic routine. We want to make sure kids have a homework hotspot. And the other thing we want to do as parents is really to focus on completion and not so much worry about quality. That means we really need to encourage our kids to get their homework done, but we don't need to be super focused on quality. Quality is, do you have all the words spelled right? Do you have enough vocabulary words in the sentence? Did you check all your math? Did you write down each step when you were solving that problem? Those are quality issues. And when we always correct kids for quality, it invites a lot of arguments and friction. So I suggest leave the quality up to the teacher and really make sure kids are focused on just getting it done. When kids are stuck when they're doing their homework, whether you're focused on completion or not, they still will have difficulty. And it's super common for kids to get stuck and for parents not to quite know how to help them. So let's say your child's working on math and they're really frustrated and they don't know what to do, how to solve the problem. There are 3 choices we have as parents. We can say, this is your homework, not mine. I already went to 5th grade, which isn't a great response because we want our kids to be able to come to us if they need help later on. And not just with academics, with other things like friendships, issues they're having. So we want to help them, not push them away too much. On the other hand, we don't want to overhelp. So this would be an example of, oh, let me show you how to do it. Do it like this. Because ultimately, your child will probably say, that's not how Mrs. Smith said to do it. Or the third option is to say, do you have any examples of this in your notes or in your book? Did your teacher post these class notes online? And this is really the best way to approach it because you're allowing your child to solve the problem on their own. You're just providing a little bit of direction and it's allowing them to be independent. So often it is this third choice that is the most helpful when kids are stuck. I mentioned earlier that if your child's having trouble, reach out to resources. And one of your best resources is your child's teacher. We'll talk about how to communicate with teachers in just a second. But there's lots of resources that schools have. Schools have a flex period during the day. This is a time when kids can go and see their teachers and get help. There might be a peer study group. You might have a parent resource center at your school. Kids can go to see their teacher after school. There might be a college student down the street that can help your child. Or it could be hiring a professional to help, which is what we do. But the first step in reaching out for help and getting resources at school is to sit down or actually even send an email and talk to the teacher. In fact, this is so interesting. I just went to, I have a bike that I ride a lot. And this afternoon I had it fixed and I went to the bike shop to pick up my bike. And the guy working there said, oh, I didn't know you have a tutoring business. And I said, yeah, I do. And he's like, oh, I really struggled with my son. He just had such a hard time with algebra, and I felt like I could never get help. And I said to the teacher, this homework is ridiculous. He doesn't know how to do any of it. He's just not going to do it. And he said, and the teacher got so upset with me. And I thought to myself, I wonder if you approached her differently, if you may have had a different outcome instead of going in there with guns blazing. And so what I found is that as a parent, using these two words, they're kind of like magic, can have a better outcome. So you might say something like, I've noticed Jimmy is having difficulty completing his math homework. Have you seen some of the same things with this difficulty in school? So this way, you're just telling the teacher what you've noticed. I've noticed he's having a hard time with this. I've noticed he has some overdue assignments. So you're not placing any blame, not really on the child and definitely not on the teacher. And this is really the best way to ask for help, by just saying what you're observing. The other reason you want to ask for help is that there's a non-parent advantage here. There is no emotional history with somebody else. There is an emotional history with you as the parent or the guardian. And I've also found over the years that kids are far more willing to take suggestions from somebody else who isn't mom or dad. Even though I do this for a living, my kids did the same thing. They think I don't know anything, but somebody else may know, may share the same exact thing, and they're more willing to listen to that other person. And it's part of being a parent. Kids are often more willing to listen to somebody else. And for that reason, we see kids all the time that are struggling in school or that are good students, but there's something getting in their way of being even better. And it's often these executive function skills, as I mentioned early on. And so I wanted just to share with you, how we approach these things in our practice, and you can glean some insight in working with your child at home should you decide to do that. You do not have to do these things. I'm not saying you should do these things. I'm just sharing with you what we do, and so you can understand what somebody from the outside, a professional, may be able to share with your student. And so when we work with kids on executive function skills, we will always go onto the portal with them. So we'll go to their homework portal, and we do this virtually, by the way, which works out great for kids. And we have them click on their class, and we'll say, okay, English, let's see English. What do you have coming up? What's due? And what you'll find in the portal is that if the teacher has assigned, say, an essay due Friday, that will populate to the calendar. But what it won't do is say, okay, this essay is due on Friday. How will your child get it done? So we take that essay and make sure it's on the calendar, and then break it down into little tasks leading up into that due date. So kids kind of have their marching orders. We work with kids on their schedule to look for weird windows. And weird windows are really these pockets of time that they can be doing work that they otherwise wouldn't think about. Often kids think, oh, I have to have this broad swath of time to do my homework, but they don't. It might be the half hour on Tuesdays that they're waiting to get their allergy shot. That's a weird window. And during that time, they could practice their vocabulary words through Quizlet. So we're identifying weird windows with kids, and we're slotting in some tasks that they can do, leading them up into that due date. And then we'll help kids complete their hardest assignments, ones that they may procrastinate on the most, so they feel like they're getting something heavy done. And then lastly, this is probably my favorite part of sessions, we help kids anticipate obstacles. This is often where students have the hardest time. They're often very optimistic, and they think, oh, I can totally write that 5-paragraph essay in 50 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes per paragraph, but it doesn't always work out like that. Often students will overestimate how much time they have, and they underestimate how long it's going to take them to do something. So we'll say, oh, okay, what could get in your way of getting that done? And they might say, well, I have, this chorus banquet on Wednesday night that might go late. Or, oh, I'm binge watching this show on Netflix. So being distracted by technology, these are very common obstacles that kids report. And we want to make sure that when confronted with this obstacle on their own, they know what to do. So we'll teach them things like tricking your brain. And tricking your brain basically means that if your brain is given a choice, and we tell kids, like, it is not your fault that you procrastinate. Your brain seeks out things that are easy, passive, and give it lots of dopamine, which makes you feel good. So when confronted with math homework or scrolling through videos on TikTok, your brain will always pick TikTok because this feels better. So you've got to trick your brain into thinking that doing that math isn't so bad. So you have to say to your brain, all right, brain, I'm only going to do this for 10 minutes. That's not so bad, is it? And then you can usually do it. So how do you do it? You need to get a timer, ideally a physical timer, not your phone. This is an example of a time timer, a product I like. And you set the timer for 10 minutes and you say to yourself, I'm going to work as hard as I can, best as I can, focus as much as I can, just for 10 minutes. For older students, they can also use this method called the tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. But often they also have to work in broader swaths of time. And here comes the Pomodoro technique. This is a technique based in research done back in the 80s, where the researcher wanted to see when students and adults have to work independently, what is their sweet spot for sustaining attention? So this would be not for younger kids, but more middle school, high school, college students. Can a person, when working independently, only sustain attention for 10 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it an hour and a half? Like, what is it? And it turns out that sweet spot is 25 minutes. So we teach kids to get a timer. It's called Pomodoro because the research was done by an Italian, and he used this tomato timer. And then Italian Pomodoro means tomato. You set a timer for 25 minutes and you say to yourself, same mantra, I'm going to work as hard as I can for 25 minutes. Then when the timer goes off, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. And if I'm able, I'll set the timer for 25 more minutes. And what he found out is for, younger students, they might only sustain 1 Pomodoro, a break, maybe 2 Pomodoros. But adults, they can actually go for up to 4 Pomodoros. So it looks like this: Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. So these are strategies that help kids when they're in the weeds and they're having a hard time dealing with the distractions of media, procrastination, those kinds of issues. So we talked about routines, we talked about getting organized, we talked about tricking your brain. Ultimately, we can suggest things to our kids, but they may not take these ideas unless we have a good relationship with them. So ultimately, it is this connection that we have with kids that is the most important thing. And it is also our biggest opportunity as a parent. It's something that we want to focus on more than any other educational strategy. We want to be that positive influence in our kids' life. And it's important because sometimes kids can be caught in what I call a doom loop. So if your child is struggling, you may have seen this before. They get a bad grade. And what often happens when you get a bad grade is you get criticism from others. The others could be a parent, it could be the teacher, it could be maybe their sports coach. And when you feel criticized a lot, it lowers your confidence. When you're not feeling good about yourself, you put forth reduced effort. And we all know that if you don't put a lot of effort into something, the same thing is going to happen again, and you get a bad grade, criticism from others. we call this the doom loop, and it's not where we want our kids to go. So we want to help kids break free of this doom loop. And so how do you do that? Well, we don't want to ask questions like, why didn't you turn this in? Did you go to see your teacher? I told you to go talk to her. Why didn't you do that? Instead, we want to use positive communication. It's easier to get kids to do things if we focus on the positives than focus on the negatives. The first step in doing this is to set up a time to talk. So if you see that your child is having a hard time in school, it's easy to feel stressed ourselves. And our kids, they feel our emotion. So if we're feeling stressed, they're feeling stressed. If we're feeling worried, they're feeling worried. If we're feeling anxious, they're feeling anxious. So we don't want to go and talk to our kids when maybe we know they got a bad grade or they have a lot of missing assignments, or we asked them to go see the teacher and they didn't, and we're mad about it. Instead, we want to revert back to those special words I talked about earlier. I've noticed. So here's an example. Instead of, how do you already have 3 missing math assignments? It's only October. Instead, we want to say, I notice it's hard to stay on top of your math work. Now, this feels better to kids. You're not putting them in a corner. You're not making a judgment. All you're doing is saying what you've observed. It feels better to kids, and they're more likely to have a conversation with you about it, which is what you want. Here's another one. I don't understand. If you don't understand these equations, why didn't you go see your teacher? A better way to approach that is, I've noticed equations are hard. And then you want to say, tell me about that, and allow your child to share with you what is happening on their end. And as a parent or guardian, we want to say, I get it. You know what? I understand. You're right. This math is hard. Or I can tell you're frustrated. Just naming the feeling and feeling empathetic kind of lowers the barrier to have a conversation about what's happening. We can also have more open-ended conversations by saying things like, oh, tell me more about that. Or, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Or it might be that your child's trying a new strategy and you might say, oh, how is that working for you? Tell me about that strategy. I ultimately have found in working with kids for many years, and our coaches working with kids for many years, that allowing kids to have a conversation and opening up the dialogue is probably one of the best techniques we have for helping kids to improve their grades and do better in school. And it is these communication, really their scripts that can make a difference. So if this would be helpful for you, you can go to that same website I referenced earlier, ectutoring.com/BTS for back to school-2023. And you can find word-by-word scripts to help you have better conversations with your child. So in the end, we want to strengthen connections. So we're not going to start with questions like, did you? We want to normalize situations as well, like, oh, I get it. You know what? You're right. This is hard. I bet other kids in 7th grade are having these same concerns. And we always want to empathize, because if we do these things, we're empowering our child to co-own the situation. We're not the one in charge. We're not nagging, poking, prodding, cajoling to get them to do things. They're co-owning it, and they're more likely to be independent. As parents, we can also use techniques like the 3-to-1 ratio. And that means for everything, every negative comment that we deliver, and sometimes we're going to have to use constructive criticism. Not everything is going to be happy and positive, because sometimes we have to tell our child, you need to do this, or, hey, this is something to consider. But think of it this way. Research has shown that if you're going to give somebody negative feedback or negative criticism, that you want to buffer that with 3 positives. And so, if you're going to have a difficult conversation with your child, really think, I don't want this to be all negative. Let me think of some positives that I can talk about too. So positives can just be like, oh, it's so great to see you. I'm glad you're home. I love the way you started your work so quickly. What a great idea to put your phone on the other side of the room. It could be a hug. It could be a tap. But these things, these little positives that we give our kids really help that relationship and ultimately amp up motivation of our students. We can also set up nag-free time zones that we agree upon with our child, like, hey, let's not talk about school during dinner. Let's just have a conversation about how everybody's doing, or talk about something completely unrelated to school. That way, you don't feel like you're asking questions or nagging. Always dinner, if you're able to have dinner together, even if it's in the car or at McDonald's, make sure meal times are nag-free. That's important to preserve the relationship. But I will say that in the end, it always gets easier as our kids get older. And let's just take a moment and think, imagine the future that your kids have graduated from high school and they have really good memories of nag-free dinners, and they remember the connection that you had with them. Sometimes they were motivated in school, sometimes not so much, but they had the tools to see them through. And that's ultimately what we want for our kids. And so if we can be of a resource to you, either with a tutor, an executive function coach to work on study habits, we're happy to help you. I have 3 program managers that I work with, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart. And they know that parents don't have to go at this alone. We have support to help, and they're happy to help to talk to you and talk about your child. And you can scan this QR code, or you can go to our website, which is ectutoring.com/get-started.